that my delighted honors turned to sadness. My mind, because of its disdainful temper, believing it could flee disdain through death, made me unjust against my own self. The seventh circle of hell is devoted to sinners who have committed acts of violence. The circle is divided into 3 rings. The first ring is murderers, the second ring is for people who harm themselves, and the third ring is for blasphemers. In Cantos 13 and 14, Dante describes the second and third rings of the seventh circle of hell. In the second ring, people who committed suicide are reincarnated as trees and constantly harmed and harassed by harpies. The quote I read at the beginning is by one of the souls explaining the unfortunate circumstances that led to him taking his own life. The bodies of the damned souls have cast aside are hung up around the woods. In this example of contrapasso, the souls aren't even allowed to live in their own bodies, since they destroyed them in life, and they are forced instead to live as a tree and constantly see their own bodies hanging from the tree branches. At the end of Canto 13, dogs chase 2 men through the second ring. These men have been reckless with their possessions. This is considered violence toward possessions. Even though this is technically violence, it almost would have been more fitting to put these characters in the fourth circle with the people who spend too much money. One of the men is torn apart by the dogs, and Dante shows him pity. In the third ring, souls that committed blasphemy lie naked on a plain of sand, while fire rains down on them. Dante and Virgil encounter a giant named Capaneus, who despite years of torture still rejects God. Virgil tells the giant, "O Capaneus, for your arrogance, that is not quenched, you are punished all the more. No torture other than your own madness could offer pain enough to match your wrath." This is an interesting use of contrapasso. Virgil basically says that rejecting God is a far worse torture than the fire and the sand and all the rest. In his book, Dante Worlds, Guy P. Raffa comments on Capaneus' interesting origins. Huge and powerful warrior king who virtually embodies defiance against his highest god, Capaneus is an exemplary blasphemer, with blasphemy understood as direct violence against God. Still, it is striking that Dante selects a pagan character to represent one of the few specifically religious sins punished in hell. It's interesting that Dante punishes people who hurt themselves less than people who hurt God by committing blasphemy. According to Dante, God's feelings are more important to maintain than his people's bodies. It's even more interesting, however, that the outer ring of the seventh circle is for murderers. Dante thinks that killing other people is a lesser crime than killing yourself. Raffa comments on Dante's reaction to the other sinners in the seventh circle of hell. Dante's emotional reactions to the shades in the seventh circle range from neutral observation of the murderers and compassion for a suicide to respect for several Florentine sodomites and revulsion at the sight and behavior of the lewd usurers. It's interesting that Dante would set up a hierarchy of different types of violence, but then would react emotionally to each different type differently. In some that he set before others, he would react better to the ones that he set later. It doesn't really make sense that way he would be compassionate toward people who have committed suicide and then pretty much unfazed by the people who commit murder, and then absolutely repulsed by the people who committed usury. Now to wrap it up, here's a summary with all the most vital and useful facts from Cantos 13 and 14. Cantos 13 and 14 both take place in the seventh circle of hell. The seventh circle is devoted to all types of violence. However, Canto 13 deals with violence towards oneself, and that takes place in the second ring of the seventh circle of hell. And Canto 14 deals with violence towards God, that takes place in the third ring of the seventh circle of hell. The punishment for Cantos 13 and 14 are as follows. In Canto 13, people are turned into trees and eaten by harpies. In Canto 14, people are burned by raining fire and are forced to lay naked on the hot sand. Also, the most important character other than Dante and Virgil in Cantos 13 and 14 is Capaneus. He's a giant that Dante and Virgil encounter in Canto 14 that is supposed to represent the most ideal and exemplary blasphemy.